Can you just close the door? Okay, so today we'll be talking about cosmology. Now, before I even start, I want to make one thing: actual solutions, because that is the part which is part of a general relativity course. For that, you need the concepts of GR, and it may be anything. It will be Einstein equation, energy momentum tensor, conservation of that. You may need Penrose diagram sometime or whatever. But I cannot give you any detailed assurance or explanation about how these things directly relate to observations. Okay, I'll mention things as we pass by them, but I won't be. I may tell you what is the Hubble constant in the thing that we are calculating, but I cannot tell you what is the value as of last week or something. So I will be very, very broad picture of cosmology. Now the basic thing, this is already where I cannot give you a very good justification, but the basic starting point of cosmology is a bit like the basic starting point when we studied the Schwarzschild solution, which is let us find the most symmetric solution consistent with some situation. Let us first propose what are the symmetries that we want to realize, and then let's try to find the most general solution having those symmetries. In the case of the Schwarzschild solution, it was very clear, because we wanted the metric of space-time around some spherically symmetric static object. Object was there, and we just want the metric around it, so which was a spherically symmetric metric, and the rest, as you could see, and time independent, and the rest pretty much followed smoothly, and we got some answer. So this time, we are not interested in the metric. We are interested in, if you like, in the opposite situation. We are not interested in the metric near anything. We are interested in the sort of average metric of the entire universe. Okay, so when I say average, I don't mean it's averaged over anything, but I mean it's the typical metric of a typical point in space-time in the universe. First of all, now space-time is important, because that means from the beginning of the universe till now, we want a metric that's somehow valid at any time of our choice in the history of the universe. And secondly, at any place. But obviously, we are not now interested in the little bumps and distortions caused by the presence of planets and stars. After all, the universe is mostly empty, but mostly has some average kind of density. So in that sense, I mean average. And the simple fact about the average universe is that it's homogeneous and isotropic. This is really amazing. So we start with this principle that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. And this is known as the Copernican principle. You all probably know the history of this. It's only a few hundred years since the time that people believed the exact opposite principle, that there is a preferred origin in the universe, and that origin actually is conveniently located on Earth. So from there, of course, then the origin shifted to the sun, because the Earth goes around the sun, but then once we learned to look further and further, it became clear that there is really no origin, and the origin that we see when we are on Earth, or even when we think of Earth as going around the sun, these are all illusions in the large scheme of things. So I'm not sure this is how Copernicus put the principle, but this is the principle as we know it today, that the universe is homogeneous and isotropic. So let's be very clear what it means. Homogeneous means every point is equivalent to every other. Now, of course, we realize that we are in danger of getting our language mixed up, because we are talking about space-time. When we say every point is equivalent to every other, then we should also mean that a point in time in the past is equivalent to another point in time in the future, and observations do not support that fact. So, it's homogeneous and isotropic in space. So what we are looking for is a picture of the universe. We know the universe is expanding, we know that galaxies are moving apart from each other. These are all from observations. So the universe is expanding, but at any fixed time, it is homogeneous and isotropic in space. So this is the kind of situation we are trying to model and find the most symmetric solution of Einstein equations consistent with this. Isotropy is It's the same statement, but its every direction is equivalent to every other. Now it's possible to be isotropic about a single point. For example, if you are at the center of an object with spherical symmetry, then you have got isotropy. But of course you don't have homogeneity, because if you now move to another place, then it's not the same. And in fact in this other place there won't even be isotropy. But if you have isotropy at every point, then of course you have homogeneity. Because if you have isotropy everywhere, then it means that things are spherically symmetric about every point. That can only be true if they are also translationally. Okay. Likewise, if you have isotropy at one point and homogeneity, then you have both of these at every point. So it's very easy. I'm not going to write these things down. We are not trying to look for the exactly minimal statement of it. Finally, this is what we want, both of these things. Okay. Good. Now, what does it mean mathematically? There has to be a mathematical meaning for both. So let's remove these words and write down something which uses killing vector. Okay. So there should exist a killing vector carrying any point to any other. Now you may object that we never said from the beginning of this course that vectors carry anything or killing vectors carry anything. They are just vectors. So what does it mean to carry? Well, of course a vector field defines a direction. So what we would do is to just take a point and then just flow it along the direction chosen by the vector field. So it does have a precise mathematical meaning. Infinitesimally it's very easy because the vector just points in a particular direction. So we can just go epsilon in that direction. If we want to go a finite distance, we have to integrate the vector field along some path. Okay? But either way, this should be possible. As an example, homogeneous in space, in a flat space, the killing vector is just d by dx or d by dy or d by dz. It just translates us. So of course 3 translations will generate some linear combination of those 3 will take us from any point to any other point. Okay, but this is not going to be in flat space. Isotropic is similar. So there should exist a killing vector actually I don't know if I've even written down the exact statement. Yeah, I think the correct statement is, there should exist a killing vector which keeps one point fixed, because isotropy always means rotation around a point. What else should we require of this killing vector? Well, norm. Yeah, a killing vector by definition preserves the Lagrange. So a killing vector is an isometry. We saw that this relation between killing vector and isometry. Basically, it's a transformation of the metric. It can be viewed either as a transformation of the metric or as a change of coordinates or as a motion from one point to another point in the metric. It's all the same. So killing vector and isometry are the same, which means that under this motion the metric doesn't change. Okay. But for a homogeneous one, there should exist a killing vector carrying one point, any point to any other. That means that in fact there should exist total of d. I'm using small d always for the number of space dimensions. So for us it's 3. So there should be d killing vectors because there are d independent directions in space. So d such killing vectors. The killing vector itself generates a rotation. You are on the right track. The killing vector for isotropy, the one which implements isotropy, generates a rotation. So the number of such vectors should be in correspondence with the number of rotations. Now, how many rotations can we have? d into d minus 1 by 2, which is the number of pairs of coordinates. You should remember that a pair of coordinates is a plane and a rotation is always in that. It so happens in 3 dimensions that there is one vector normal to that. In arbitrary dimensions that's not so, but there's still always a plane. So if you ever study the orthogonal group from point of view of group theory, you'll see that the generators of rotations are always written as antisymmetric matrices. Why antisymmetric? Because that matrix with indices xy is the generator of xy rotations. Okay, but if you have x, y, z, t, u, v, w, 6 space dimensions, then every pair of such indices will give you one rotation. And antisymmetry is just the usual thing that the plane has an orientation. So if you interchange the indices, then you think of x and y this way, it turns into x and y the other way. That's what that is. Okay, so and is associated to each plane. And there is one for each plane, that's what I'm trying to say. So the total number is d into d minus 1 by 2. So the total number of Killing vectors for this entire story is d into d plus 1 by 2. Now it's unnecessary to say this, but again I repeat, the space-time we are going to look for to represent cosmology is not homogeneous and isotropic in space-time, only in space. Okay, so it's not going to have capital D into capital D plus 1 by 2 Killing vector. There could be something like that. For example, Minkowski space, which is completely flat in space and time and homogeneous and isotropic in space and time, will have more Killing vectors. This only has the maximum number of Killing vectors in the space part. Okay, that's d into d plus 1 by 2. And when d is 3, that is 6. Okay, 3 translations and 3 rotations. Now it's a theorem which I won't prove precisely for you, but this is the maximum number of Killing vectors that a space of d dimensions can have. Okay, any space of d dimensions can have at most d into d plus 1 by 2 Killing vectors, and so such a space is called a maximally symmetric space. Now the fact that it's a maximally symmetric space is going to be very useful, because in this case, this is of course a huge amount of symmetry which will help us solve Einstein equations. Finally, that's always what we want. But here, it's going to help us in a very nice way, because it's going to constrain the Riemann curvature even before we try to solve Einstein equations. So that's very good. It's going to give an algebraic equation for R, while Einstein equations involve yeah.
Sir, they were saying that for space dimensions,
yes,
only we will have d into d plus 1 by 2.
Yes.
And for maximally symmetric space, is it maximally symmetric space or maximally symmetric d-dimensional space time?
No, space, only space. That's what I was saying.
Spatial part is maximally symmetric.
The spatial part is maximally symmetric. For any fixed time, the spatial metric is maximally symmetric. But since the metric will be time dependent, let me just say right away, it will be time dependent. So every spatial section doesn't look the same exactly as every other. For example, it may grow in size. Okay, but that won't affect these Killing vectors. So it's going to be maximally symmetric at each time.
Then suppose I write a metric which has three spatial in 4 dimensions.
Yes.
3 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension.
Yes.
Then I write a metric which has 3 spatial Killing vectors.
Yes.
And
We
but
want
the
six.
metric is
Six, not 3.
but the metric is time dependent.
Yes.
Can we then call it a maximum symmetric space?
No. No. First of all, we haven't discussed any time-dependent metrics here. We are now discussing only space. We'll come back and talk about time later. Right now, so you are trying to jump to the space-time. I'm not trying to jump to that. I'm trying to make a theorem about maximally symmetric space. This theorem will be useful in cosmology. It's also useful in other things. It's useful in mathematics, in pure mathematics, or it could be useful if you're trying to do physics on a curved surface, not general relativity. You might have a particle constraint to move on some surface. Then this stuff will be useful. So this is all spatial geometry, not space-time dimension. Okay. Now, there's a famous theorem about maximally symmetric spaces, and the theorem says that for a maximally symmetric space, the Riemann tensor, I always use IJKL when I am referring to space and not space-time, is equal to a constant K times GIK GJL minus GIL. We have seen something similar in 2 dimensions, but there K was not given to be constant. Okay. So here K is constant. Of course, from this you can extract, assuming this result, you can extract some obvious consequences. Contract both sides by GIK, then you will find that RJL is equal to D minus 1 into K GJL. Okay, if I contract with GIK, from here I get D times GJL, here I get minus GJL, so D minus 1 times K times GJL. So the Ricci tensor is proportional to the metric. Contract it again by with GJL, then I find that R is equal to D into D minus 1 into K. So therefore this factor K is R upon D minus 1. You can put that back in here. However, as I said, it's not just that it has this form, but that the coefficient is constant, which means, of course, that R itself has a spatial dependence given entirely by the dependence of the metric. This doesn't depend on space. In turn, this has the same property, and finally, this one, of course, is actually constant. The Ricci scalar is just constant. All right. Of course, I haven't yet proved the theorem, but these are 2 obvious consequences. Okay. So now let's try to prove the theorem. Let me move this stuff. Now, looking at proofs of this theorem in textbooks, you get a very good insight into the minds of the authors. Some people like the algebraic approach, some people like to motivate it and keep talking about it for pages. But actually here Wald is by far the winner. He gives the 3-line proof, which also tells you why it is so. I think that is absolutely lovely. Unfortunately, his notation is very opaque, so I'll give it to you in ordinary notation. So the idea is the following. Isotropy implies there should be no preferred two planes in the space. Think about it the following way. Supposing you were in 3 dimensions, a 2-plane is orthogonal to a vector. We certainly know that isotropy tells us that there is no preferred vector. That's the whole job of isotropy. Right? That's the statement of isotropy. But the more general statement is that the thing is symmetric under rotations, all rotations. Right? If it's symmetric under all rotations, then there should not be any particular plane which can be identified and say this one is special in the manifold. Okay. Now, however, we realize that in general there are some preferred 2 planes in any space with a Riemannian metric, and we have to worry what happens when those planes exist. There are such 2 planes, are preferred 2 planes, and they are defined as follows. Let's consider the Riemann tensor. Let's be in Riemann normal coordinates for this discussion. So, although the metric of course has second derivatives, but its metric itself is delta ij at that point. Just at one point. Okay. Now, let's look at the Riemann tensor from a slightly different perspective from what we used to. Let's think of it as Rij upper KL. In Riemann normal coordinates is the same as Rij lower KL at that point. Okay. Let's think of it as a matrix with this being one index and this being another index. Okay, so this is one index. It's a collective index. So for example, in 3 dimensions, it takes the values 1, 2, 2, 3 and 1, 3. So there are 3 values, but in any n dimensions, it takes a set of n minus 1 by 2 values. And this also takes a similar set of values. And the matrix is symmetric in this sense because this pair can be interchanged with this pair. Okay, so we think of it as a matrix with 2 generalized indices. And it's symmetric and real. So what can we do with the real and symmetric matrix? We can find its eigenvalues and eigenvectors. Okay, it has got nice eigenvalues and eigenvectors. So the eigenvector can be written as some. It's a vector in the sense it has one of these 2 indices. So it's also an antisymmetric tensor of second rank with 2 indices. And the eigenvalue equation is that this is equal to lambda Vij. You see, we never thought of the Riemann tensor in this way. We always thought it has 4 indices, but in this way of thinking about it, it has 2 generalized indices, and one can write the eigenvalue equation. Nothing puzzling about the eigenvalue equation. You will get it.
So I don't know why we get this.
Because the generalized pair of indices is a pair of all antisymmetric pairs. Supposing we were in 4 dimensions, 4 space dimensions, then KL could take the value for this guy as 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 2, 4 and 3, 4. That's 6 values. So we use the same 6 values to label this and sum over those 6 values. So it's a 6 by 6 matrix, symmetric under interchange of its 2 indices, and we get it. Good. Okay. Now, this is very bad because if we have, let's say we have distinct eigenvalues. So in general, this is a d into d minus 1 by 2 times d into d minus 1 by 2 matrix. So suppose it has d into d minus 1 by 2 distinct eigenvalues. Then we are in some sort of trouble because corresponding to them there are d into d minus 1 by 2 distinct eigenvectors, and each one of them, because it is it has a pair of antisymmetric indices, it specifies a plane in the manifold. So contrary to that assumption, we have got precisely a bunch of specified planes, preferred planes. The eigenvectors define preferred planes. If you look at my notes when I put them on the web, I've done this for 3 dimensions where you can make it much more explicit. Okay. So what does the Riemann tensor have to satisfy? All eigenvalues have to be equal. If all eigenvalues are equal, then it's proportional to the identity. In this sense, if it's proportional to the identity, then of course there's no problem because every vector is an eigenvector. Okay? Then every 2 plane is as good as every other 2 plane. So it means, so isotropy implies that R, I, J, K, L should be proportional to identity. Now, what is identity in 2 pairs of indices? You know what is identity in 2 indices? If this index was capital I and that was capital J, then identity is delta Ij, says that I is equal to J. Okay. Now, it says that I is equal to K and J is equal to L, or I is equal to L and J is equal to K with a minus sign. That's what identity means, right? So therefore, this is equal to delta Ik, delta Jl minus delta Il, delta Jk with a possible proportionality constant.
This is proportional terms of Levy-Smith.
Yes, it is proportional to the contraction of 2 Levi-Civita symbols, That is what I have used in my notes, but that is special only for 3 dimensions, because only in 3 dimensions the Levi-Civita symbol epsilon ijk exists. In higher dimensions it has that many indices. Okay, but in 3 dimensions this can also be, what happens in 3 dimensions, you can use 2 epsilon symbols to convert this to a real matrix with 3 cross 3 matrix. Then the eigenvectors are actual vectors. Then you can put those equal to the matrix proportional to the identity, and use the epsilon symbols to go back to this notation. We'll get the same. You can do it a little bit more explicitly, but this is clearly the identity, because its job is to give you 1 if this pair is the same as this pair, and -1 if this pair is the same as that pair reversed. That is its job, and it's doing it. And here's the coefficient k. This was all done in Riemann normal coordinates. Now we can lower everything and we simply convert it into a tensor equation. So R I J K L in complete generality is G I K G J L minus G I L K. Up to now I haven't proved that k is constant, because in fact we've only used isotropy. Okay. Homogeneity tells me that in this, before I even went here, homogeneity tells me that k should be the same at every point. So k is constant. So this is nice because it uses isotropy in one step and homogeneity in the next step. Yes.
Why should we equal to identity? IJK, I mean, if it has only one eigenvalue, which is k to the minus 1 by 2 times the inlet, why should we equal to identity?
Taking a number
Any matrix which has got all the same eigenvalue, when you diagonalize it, then it's proportional to identity, right? Now you try undiagonalizing it, nothing happens because there's only identity in it. And it's true of any matrix. Any matrix which has all eigenvalues the same is proportional to the identity. Once a matrix is proportional to the identity in any basis, then it's always the same, because identity is in basis. Yes. Yes.
If we take some B as K or K.
Yes. Correct.
This B as a.
Yes.
Then this necessity means this K can take, suppose K, this P takes 4 by. Can be satisfied by 2 plus 2 or 3 plus 2.
No. Which B?
Means K I am writing it as a combined this B.
Yes.
So
Okay.
it has 6 elements.
Yes.
If the P takes 4, then K.
No. P is not the sum of the values. P is a name for the value. So think of it like this. Supposing we were in D equals 4, just to be very explicit, then KL is 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4, 2, 3, 2, 4, 3, 7, right? What is the index P? It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Arbitrary. Completely, I can give it in any name, any way. I just relabel these values as these values. Okay, this is what a composite index means. After all, an index just labels things, right? So, I mean, now you can see what I mean. Huh? So you can just take a bunch of labeled things and relabel them starting from 1 to the end. They may have been labeled by many other things, but you are free to relabel them however you like. It's just a slight abstraction of the concept of an index. Okay, in 3 dimensions. Anyway, I am not going to go into that now, but please read my notes when I put them up. In 3 dimensions, you can just convert this really, because then you have 1, 2, 1, 3, and 2, 3. That's equal in number to the values. There are 3 values. So 1, 2 can be labeled as 3, 1, 3 is labeled as 2, and 2, 3 is labeled as 1. That is the epsilon. And then everything goes through.
Sir, when
Yes.
you just convert the decimal to generalized coordinates,
Yes.
when the conical delta is by definition 1 or 0, if the indices are equal to 1 or
Yes.
equal,
Yes.
yeah.
Correct.
So that definition is true for any.
Yes. No, that definition is not true for any prime in general relativity. That's true in special relativity. That's true in ordinary, in rotational symmetry. It's not true in general relativity. What is delta ij in one prime is gij in or in any other. what happens there is that supposing it's delta ij in one frame, then it is just means that we happen to be in Riemann normal coordinates at that point. It could also be delta ij everywhere, and I'll change coordinates in such a way that it becomes some new gij. For example, from Cartesian to polar coordinates. Once I go in polar coordinates, gij is not delta ij. It has some r dependence, theta dependence, but it can always be brought back to delta ij by change of coordinates.
The fact we use Riemann normal coordinates only appears in the deltas.
Essentially that.
The final result is independent.
The final result, of course, that's the whole point of using Riemann normal coordinates is always that we just use it so that we can do our calculations and then generalize them. If this result is true in some coordinate system, then it has to be that this result is true in general. Why? Because this result implies that result in the special coordinate system, but it's a tensorial relation which is true in every coordinate system. Another better way is take the difference of the two sides, that is 0 in this coordinate system, therefore it's 0 in all coordinate systems. Tensor which is 0 in one coordinate system is 0 in all coordinate. Lots of ways. Anyway, it's possible we could have done this without going into that normal coordinates, but then the meaning of identity was a bit unclear. See, we really want this to be proportional to identity, not GI, not some matrix Gij. Gij is not an identity matrix. Okay, then it would not have been clear. Actually, another way to say is that we could do this in orthonormal frames, but unfortunately that I haven't brought you. So what will happen? Can I go on, please? Yes. Yeah. See, if you have a question. Orthonormal frames will be done in this course, yes, but when I can. Okay, so now we are in business, and the only equation that we need is Rij. I better speed up, I'm far too slow. Okay. Good. Now the most general space-time, which is at every instant of time has the property that it's homogeneous and isotropic in space, can be written in the following way. Now there's plenty of scope for confusion in my notation because I call Gij3 as the metric of the spatial slice, but really speaking the spatial part of this metric is A of t squared times Gij. So people introduce lots and lots of notation, but I think there's no substitute to just keeping in your mind what is going on. It's much better than notation. Okay? So Gij is the metric of the spatial slice. Okay. Now why do so A of t is some function of t called the scale factor, and as soon as you look at this, you will say, well, we could have had many more things. We could have had a function of t over here, for example, wouldn't have contradicted homogeneity and isotropy. We could have possibly had a cross term dt dxi if we were careful enough about it. Okay. The claim, and again I am not going to justify it rigorously here, is that you can find coordinates in which this is true. Okay. Obviously I can't prove that this is true in general, because take this space-time and make an arbitrary general coordinate transformation. You will lose every property that you see on the board. Okay.
Means that also all those matrix can be converted back to this.
That's right. It's exactly like we did for the Schwarzschild solution. I never said the only spherically symmetric metric has to be e to the alpha of r times dt squared and all that. I said this is the way of writing it. After we found the final answer, you are always free to take this and convert all the coordinates to any function of themselves and get a metric which would take you 20 pages to write down and wouldn't make sense to anybody, but it's still the same metric, just in different coordinates. Okay? You should never forget the enormous freedom you have to define 4 new functions, each one of 4 old variables, and transform any metric into a complete mess. You can do that with Minkowski space also. Okay? So therefore, nobody can ever tell you that the metric of anything has to look like this. They can only say it looks like this in some coordinate system, and we are going to work in that coordinate system. Okay? Now this metric is very nice. Okay, a few things you can see. if time was parameterized differently, t1 to t prime of t, then a would still be a function of the new t. So we don't know what it is, so that doesn't matter. This would get a factor, so it would be dt upon or dt times some function of t. Okay, but conversely, if there was such a function of t, you could absorb it by redefining that. So the fact that there is just -1 here is not so surprising, because we are not allowing space dependence, because all the space dependence is in this metric. Okay, so this is the metric of a maximally symmetric 3-space. Okay, and this special set of coordinates has a name. These are called co-moving coordinates. And if I am not mistaken, the general definition of co-moving coordinates is that first the cross term dt dxi is 0, but also I think I have done this here perhaps. I have done something similar. I don't remember what it is. Synchronous. Is that the same? Isn't it the same? I think it's the same, because there also g00 was 1 and the cross term was 0. So I think it's the same as synchronous. So good. So that's it. And now what do we have to do? We plug in here any maximally symmetric space we can find. Then we throw this whole thing into Einstein's equations. Then we have to discuss what energy momentum tensor we want to use. That's very important. Okay? And then we solve it. So these are the various things. So we'll carry out each of these steps. So first, let's go back to the 3 geometry and determine it a little bit better. We know it's maximally symmetric, so what is the metric for that? Okay. So here too, so here what I'm going to do is the following trick. Maximal symmetry, of course, is a requirement that Riemann tensor is proportional to Gg minus G. I wrote that down. We have to implement that. Okay. But we have to start from something. We have to start with a metric and then impose maximal symmetry. So let's start with a spherically symmetric metric, because spherical symmetry is part of maximal symmetry. It's a much weaker condition, but it won't harm us to start with that. Okay. And one nice thing is that we'll recycle some old formulae that we've used already when doing the Schwarzschild solution. So I'm going to assume that this is our old friend e to the 2 beta of rho. I never know whether I should call this rho or r. It really makes no difference. Let's call it rho since I've called it that in my notes. So here's a spherically symmetric metric. Okay, it has 2 angular coordinates. This is the metric of that unit 2 sphere. It has the radial thing in front. And then this part has a function beta which remains to be determined. Okay. We are looking for a spherically symmetric space, not a spherically symmetric space-time. Because we are only trying to find this part. Afterwards, we'll plug the whole thing. The whole thing anyway is not, afterwards we'll plug the whole thing into Einstein equations. Okay, good. Okay. Now, the nice thing is that we can take this and we can go back in our notes and find out all the affine connections and Riemann tensors and Ricci tensors for this metric, because we've already done the calculation. Okay? Using old calculations. So you won't find it surprising when I write down for you some answers. So let me write them here. R. Now again, notational problem. What is this R? It's the Riemann tensor of the 3 geometry, not the Riemann tensor of the 4 geometry, and it's not even some component of the Riemann tensor of the 4 geometry. It's only the Riemann tensor of the 3 geometry. It's computed exactly as per definition, but with all indices equal to only ijk and never 0. So that comes out as the following answer. Maybe I'll write it on this side. So first of all, it's diagonal, which is nice. I'll put a 3 here to remind us of this. 2 upon rho prime. You'll see these are all functions we have already encountered. R theta theta 3 geometry is e to the minus 2 beta rho beta prime minus 1 plus 1. And what is R phi phi? Come on. You remember it?
Let's go there.
Thank you. It's r theta theta. And it's not going to give any limitations. That's before. That is it. Okay. So now we impose the condition of maximal symmetry, which is that Rij C is equal to 2k. So this was d minus 1, now d is 3. So it's 2k Gij. So now for the first time we are imposing maximal symmetry. It's stronger, it's not the strongest form, but turns out it will be enough. Strongest form would be to calculate the full Riemann tensor, but this will be enough for us. Okay? And we expect it won't be too complicated to impose. So let's do it. So what is it? The rho equation, left side is 2 by rho beta prime, and the right side is 2k times g rho, which is e to the 2 beta. Okay, that's the rho equation. And actually, we won't really need much more than that. So let's try to solve this equation. How do we solve this equation? Very easy. Separation of variables. E to the 2 beta comes on this side. Rho goes there. This prime is derivative with respect to rho. So you will believe me when I write down for you at the end that beta of rho is equal to minus half log of constant. This is the integration constant minus k rho square. You can more or less visually inspect that if you differentiate this, you will get, and divide by rho, you will get what you have on the right side. Okay? Now, how do we fix the constant? Well, when rho is equal to infinity, actually that's a dangerous thing to say because rho may never be equal to infinity. We don't actually know yet much about the range of rho, and we'll be seeing in a moment that rho can sometimes be infinity and sometimes not. But how do we fix the constant? At rho equals 0, not infinity. Very silly. 0 is always there. When rho is 0, that's the origin of this spherically symmetric thing. And there we expect that this should go to 1. Okay, beta should go to 0, and that fixes the constant to be 1. Okay, so we found beta of rho. That's very good.
So why this condition?
Why this condition? Because anything else would make this metric singular. See, at rho equals 0, we are at the origin of some kind of spherical coordinates, with the origin of a spherical body, right? Now, the coordinate rho, if it is a radial coordinate, should have the property that at rho equals just around the origin, the metric is just like d rho square. The angular dependence drops out when rho is 0. Okay. You could, of course, have it. Okay. Put it another way. No, I don't want to put it another way. I think the correct. Yeah. Sorry. I take that back. Imagine beta of rho is some function which has a development expansion in rho. Okay. So its lowest order term is the term which we are trying to fix. We are claiming it's 1. Supposing it was 3. Then the metric near the origin was 3 d rho square plus rho square p omega. Okay. It's quite easy to see that this is a singular metric. I'll tell you why. It's sort of an aside. Supposing I had a metric, let me just do it here. Supposing I had a metric A, just consider the following metric on the plane. A dr square plus r square d theta square. This is an exercise you take home. This is just on the plane polar coordinates. We know that when A is 1, this metric is the metric of the plane. You can transform it to dx square plus dy square. Now put A here where A is not 1. So this metric by conformal transformation, which doesn't change the singularity or behavior of it in any way, I can factor out A and forget about it, but then it goes here. Okay. Now it's very easy. Now you try to make coordinates which map it back onto the plane, and you will see that you get a singular solution. Actually, it is really singular because the only way that so these coordinates are bad at the origin, right? Because at the origin, theta is not even well defined. Theta is the angular coordinates. Right? The only way this possible badness can be repaired is that the combination dr squared plus r squared d theta squared allows us to go into other coordinates where we see that actually nothing is wrong at the origin. As soon as you have any factor, in fact something is wrong at the origin. You might say almost it's a lucky thing that this one doesn't have anything wrong. It looks like even this should be bad at the origin because one term simply drops out, very much like the black hole at the horizon. One of the two terms in the metric disappears, but it's a coordinate singularity. We know this. Okay. But you can't play with coordinate singularities. They can go away if the metric is very nicely chosen, otherwise they don't. So that fixes the fact that near the origin where this thing is disappearing, this had better be exactly the right amount so that this plus this forms the metric locally of three-dimensional space. Then we can be sure it's a coordinate. Do that exercise, have some fun with that metric. It's a two-dimensional metric, so it can't be very big. Yes?
I thought you hadn't shown that K is actually a constant.
No, I didn't. I said that isotropy doesn't imply it, but homogeneity implies it. Any part of the metric drops out, it's a singular point for those coordinates. Then you have to worry about whether it's a singular point for the space-time or not, for the space or not. Okay. Because if any part of the metric drops out, it means that that coordinate isn't contributing. You can be arbitrarily separated in that coordinate and still the distance is zero. That doesn't make much sense. However, with theta, we know what it is. We know that the distances in theta are really r d theta and not d theta. And those are r d theta is shrinking. The amount of theta in a narrow angle is the same whether I am far from the origin or close to the origin. But r d theta is shrinking, and r d theta goes to zero at the origin, and that just works out that it's not problematic. If it was not r d theta but root r times d theta or 3r times d theta, it just wouldn't work. Okay. Good. Okay, so we are done. This is the thing. And that means we have got the metric. So now let's write the metric. This metric. Then we'll come back to this metric. I'm rubbing it out, but this is what we are after finally. We are still working out the spatial metric. So we just need to take e to the 2 beta. The 2 comes here. The minus gives me a denominator. So finally, the 3 metric, I keep writing it like this, is equal to d rho square upon 1 minus k rho square plus rho square d theta square. For at the moment for an arbitrary constant k. Okay. Now this has an interesting property that k can be restricted using a symmetry of the solution. The symmetry of the solution, which is a scaling kind of symmetry. Okay. Supposing I take rho and replace it by some constant lambda times rho. Okay. Now I don't mind if the result of this is to scale up this whole metric by a conformal factor, because I can absorb it in A of t. Remember that I am trying to put this metric in a space-time, and I am just making a constant scale here. So I can make a constant rescaling to A to absorb that. So I would like this to be a scaling outside the whole thing. So that's good because this picks up lambda squared, this picks up lambda squared. But here, this picks up lambda squared, and therefore I must rescale k to lambda to the minus 2k.
What term is k?
It's an arbitrary constant. It's an arbitrary constant because basically it's nothing but the Ricci scalar of the space up to a factor. 2k is probably the Ricci scalar of the space. So it's undetermined right now. In fact, it's undetermined at all because it's a constant. And if I can have a space solving Einstein equations with some constant value of the Ricci scalar, I'll be able. Well, we'll see. Let's wait and see.
K can be negative. K only can be negative.
No, I'm coming to that. It has all possibilities.
Because it is
Yeah, actually, I would really rather that people should only ask me their confusion and not try to give the rest of my lecture because I'm giving the lecture and when I give it, everything will become clear. But if there's something I've already said which is not clear, then please feel free to ask. Okay. So there's a symmetry like this which sends this 3 metric to lambda squared times itself. Therefore, with A of t going to lambda inverse A of t, the form metric is preserved. Now notice that this symmetry doesn't change the sign of k. K is positive, then after this it's positive because this is square of a real number. If it's negative, it will remain negative, and if it's 0, it will remain 0. Okay. However, we can use this scaling to fix it to a standard positive or negative value if it's positive or negative already. That means if it's any positive value, I can make it +1. If it's any negative value, I can make it -1. And if it's 0, then the scaling doesn't affect it and it remains 0. So there are actually only 3 values of k that we need to consider: +1, -1 and 0. Okay. Of course, in principle, nothing stops us considering all the other values too. It's just for our convenience we consider these 3 because the scaling allows us to generate any other value from that. Okay. So you shouldn't think of it as a physical decision we have made, just that we can restrict our attention to these 3 cases. Otherwise, there were infinitely many cases, all positive case, all negative case. We have narrowed it down. Okay. Now you are worried that if it's positive, something will go wrong. So we'll worry about that. And it's very nice. It's good that you are worrying about it because the answer will be something extremely pretty and it will teach us some lesson about geometry. Okay, so let's keep that in mind. So using this, this scaling, we can set k equals +1, 0 or minus. So we can consider 3 cases: +1, 0 and -1. Now, since k is proportional to the Ricci scalar and the Ricci scalar is a measure of curvature of the space, it's called the Ricci curvature and it's the only scalar measure of curvature. So when k is positive, we say the space, the 3 space, has positive curvature. When it's -1, we say the 3 space has negative curvature. When it's 0, then the entire space is flat because remember, the full Rijkl was proportional to k, part of the maximal symmetry assumption. So Rijkl was 0, so we are very much within our rights to say that this case is flat. You will also see today that flat spaces are not as boring as you might imagine. There are some things about it which we will discuss. Okay, so these are the 3 options. That in a spherically symmetric, in a maximally symmetric space, you have the option for it to be a maximally symmetric space of positive curvature or negative curvature or curvature. These are the 3. Good. So we can now discuss them one by one. Let's first discuss the flat case. If it's flat, then the 3 metric Gij 3 dxi dxj is just our old friend d rho squared plus rho squared d omega 2 squared. And I can exhibit it for you, but I think you know that there's a coordinate transformation from this. This is spherical polar coordinates for the 3-dimensional space. So this can also be sent to dx squared plus dy squared plus dz squared by some coordinate transformation. Is is something like x equals rho cos theta cos phi, y equals rho cos theta sin phi, and z equals rho sin phi. Okay, good. Now, in the discussion last time on Penrose diagrams, we had made a point that the range of coordinates is a very important thing. Okay. Now, up to now, we haven't said anything about the range of any coordinates, so it's up to us to specify. So we better make use of all our options, because finally we'll be matching with some experiment. So we can't choose the options only which we like. We need to explore all possibilities. And we have a very interesting possibility here. One is that minus infinity less than x, y, z less than plus infinity. This space goes in mathematics by the name R3 or Euclidean 3 space. Is the space we commonly think about. But there are other possibilities, and here's an extreme example: 0 less than or equal to x, y, z less than or equal to 1. Let's assume that they are finite values. Now, this is nothing but a 3 box. Okay, that's clear. It's a 3 cube. The problem is what happens on the faces of the cube. That one of these coordinates runs out of its values. X becomes equal to 1 and we can't go further. Okay, that's not very good, because that means space has an end. So it means by traveling sufficiently, we'll finally reach the end and we'll say, okay, that's the end of space. That's something we've not found. And it's not very nice or very natural. But there's a simple, open box. Open box is actually the same as the first case. If it is really an open box in the sense that you never reach the end in finite time, then you can map it to the first case. But there's a new possibility, which is that x equals 0 and x equals 1 are identified as the same point. Okay? Similarly for y and z, or independently for each of them. You can either have it like this, finite and identified, or you can have infinite for each of the 3 coordinates separately. What do you get when you identify x equals 0 with x equals 1? You get a circle for each coordinate. And in fact, in that case, x, y, and z are angles. Simply that. Okay. So x and y and z could be angles. There's nothing to rule it out. So continuing from that side, identifying x equals 0 with x equals 1, and same for y and z. We get the maximally symmetric space S1 cross S1 cross S1. Circle cross a circle cross a circle. Okay. Each coordinate is independently valued on a circle. It's a 3-dimensional space, but notice that it's quite different from the 3-dimensional space, which is a 3-dimensional sphere, S3. That's a different space from this. In fact, the most striking difference is that it's flat. I started with that. That's how we ever got to this metric. This is a flat metric. Okay?
Is it the only flat compact?
Yes. Exactly. So, basically the rule is, if you don't want to go into details of differential geometry or topology, all you need to know is this: given a direction which is not linked to any other, because this is flat, so the metric has absolutely no dependence on x, y, and z. So each direction is doing its own thing. This already tells you by separation of variables that the space is the product of 3 spaces: the x space, the y space, and the z space. If there was any functional dependence, it wouldn't be so. Okay? Given that, each of them individually can either be infinite or can be, as we say, compactified on a circle, and then it's angle valued. So you can have intermediate possibilities like S1 cross S1 cross R, or S1 cross R cross R. R cross R is just otherwise known as R2, or you can have R cross R, which is otherwise known as R3, which is the first possibility. I emphasize that without an experimental observation, these are all possible geometries for the maximally symmetric spacetime that describes our universe. Okay? And there's a clear experimental test in principle for this, which is if this is the geometry, then travel in the x direction for a sufficiently long time and you will come back to where you started without having changed your direction of motion. Okay? And if this happens for 3 independent directions, then this is the case. It could happen like this, it could happen like this. There are more complicated things you can do because it could be some combination of directions which have periodicity and so on. So there are many things. But the generic name for such things is torus. So this is called 3 torus. S1 cross S1 alone is called the 2 torus. It's more familiar to us. We draw it like this. Whenever we draw it like this, we get very puzzled because it looks curved. We can't make this out of a flat piece of paper, for example. You can make the cylinder out of a flat piece of paper, but next time you try to do this and your paper gets ruined. So it doesn't look flat. It is one of those facts of life. It is flat. Its Riemann curvature tensor is 0. Its metric is delta ij. The reason it doesn't look flat is that it has no flat embedding in 3 dimensions. So it's not the fault of the torus, but the fault that we in 3 dimensions are trying to make it. Just for your information, because people, including some good, otherwise good physicists, often confuse the look of this thing with the fact that it's curved. It's not curved. Okay, it's this. This is S1 process. Just keep that in mind. However, the other thing which looks equally curved, S2, is really curved. Okay? One of the great things about what we are doing is that I have given you equations to test whether something is curved or not. You can apply those equations to this, whose metric is that, and without much calculation, I'm sure you can see that everything on the Riemann curvature is 0. But soon we'll find a metric for some. We've already seen a metric for S2. Now we'll find a metric for S3, and it's very much curved. Okay? So this completes my discussion of the k equals 0 case. And now we can go on to do k equals plus 1 and minus 1. First, let's do k equals plus 1, which is the one that's worrying people with good reason, and we'll see how cleverly the space solves our problem. So in this case, Gij 3 dxi dxj is d rho squared upon 1 minus rho squared plus rho squared d rho squared. First of all, let's notice, of course we decided it had to be this way, that near rho equals 0 there is absolutely no problem. It's exactly d rho squared plus rho squared d omega squared, which means it's like a tiny disk. Tiny because we are near rho equals 0. Exactly as it should be. We know that a tiny disk has no problem near its origin, so that's not where we should worry. But near rho equals 1 we definitely should worry, yes.
Identifying the pieces of the cube, did anything prevent us from testing it?
No, for example, that could also have been done. So there are more things that could be done. That's the
Please,
yes. I briefly mentioned that you can do things with combinations of portions, so that's an example. Okay, good. So what happens? Well, the first thing to note about this space is that we hadn't decided what are the values of rho, but we better decide now if we don't want to be faced with a space that at some value is turning into a time. Okay, that certainly we don't want. This is a maximally symmetric space and we would like it to remain a space. So we'll simply say 0 is less than or equal to rho is less than 1. We are not yet out of trouble because we need to know what happens close to rho equals 1. But we are certainly within our rights to do it, and also we have to do it. Because if rho is greater than 1, then we are in all kinds of trouble. So the next question is, well, what is this space, this whole thing, geometrically? So for that, it's completely natural to define some coordinate, new coordinate, chi, such that d chi is equal to d rho upon square root of 1 minus rho squared. If we could do this, then the first coordinate is d chi squared and we are free of trouble. Well, this we certainly can do. It's nothing but a differential equation which we can integrate. And what's the integral of the right side? Sine inverse. So chi is sine inverse of rho. Since rho goes from 0 to 1, chi goes from 0 to pi by by 2. We'll allow this. We'll see what happens here. Okay. So therefore, this metric now is d chi square plus, what should I put in place of rho square? Sine square chi. And now I am writing what's in the brackets, d theta square plus sine square theta d phi square. Now can anyone identify what this is a metric of? First of all, it's a three-dimensional space. Who said 3 sphere? Okay. And based on?
I think it's a 2 sphere inside.
It is exactly the, sorry.
Inside you have a 2 sphere. And then again you have the coordinates.
Good. Of course, that doesn't prove it because your argument would have said that this is also a 3 sphere, but this is a singular thing. Again, these are all things that have to match just right. If you think about this, you'll understand why this is a 3 sphere. And indeed, I mean, what you're saying is right, and it is. So first of all, this is the metric of the 3 sphere S3. Let's just think physically or geometrically about this part. This part we have all agreed that is the metric of the 2 sphere. We have been using it for 2 months, so you can't now question this. Okay? What is it really? Near theta equals 0, it's d theta squared plus theta squared d phi squared. What is that? It's a disk. So for near small theta, theta behaves like a radial coordinate, and we found a little patch which is a disk. The patch, this disk grows as theta becomes bigger, but we would have a disaster if, we would have a disaster in the sense we would have a space that grows without limit if theta was allowed to be unbounded. Okay? The trick is the function theta squared over here slowly changes over to sine squared theta, and that actually causes this space to close over on the other side and make my sphere. Exactly the same thing has happened here. If this was rho squared, it looked like an expanding 2 sphere, but being sine squared chi, it has allowed that 2 sphere to go around and close on the other side into a 3 sphere. At least one thing is perfectly consistent, that we have 3 coordinates chi, theta and phi, and all of them are angle valued. So at least we know that it's some compact thing, nothing is going off to infinity. So therefore the restriction on rho was actually just in some other coordinates, telling us that we are going to get a 3 sphere. Great. Okay. Now in this case, there aren't that many options like we had in the flat case about choosing the values. Basically all the values are chosen. Theta has the range it has, 0 to pi or minus pi by 2 to plus pi by 2. And this has the range 0 to 2 pi. And this now has the range 0 to pi by 2. So there's nothing much we can fiddle with. There's one slightly conky manifold called RP3, which is half of S3 identified in some way. You could always do that, but it's not very exciting. So here we learn that it is only S3, while in this case we had all these nice different options to make space compact or non compact. Here it's only compact. Okay, and that brings us to the last case. Hardly any work. K equals -1. So same change of coordinates, but d rho over root of 1 plus rho square. So define chi to be sine hyperbolic inverse of rho. Alright. Rho, by the way, now since k is plus 1, so this is d rho. First let's write the metric. So d rho square over 1 plus rho square d omega rho square. Now there's no problem with rho, it can go from 0 to infinity. Okay, and there's no natural way to stop it doing that. And when we make this change of variables, this becomes d chi square plus sine hyperbolic square chi into this. So it's still some 3 space in which there's a 2 sphere that's moving around in chi, but it can move arbitrarily far away because this thing just keeps becoming unbounded. So it's some 3 space, and the best we can do right now without more work is to just say it's a hyperbolic type of space. now finally we can introduce terminology which the cosmologists use all the time. K equals plus 1, which was the sphere, is called a closed universe. K equals 0 is called a flat universe. Notice that the flat can be either closed or open in our mind. If open and closed or open, where open and closed mean respectively that it's non-compact, unbounded, or compact and periodic. And then minus 1 is just called open. And this one doesn't have a possibility, any obvious simple possibility to make it compact, so it's not. So these are the three options. Okay.
What is the currently
Let's get the things slow. First of all, the current view of our universe should be the view of its form metric. I don't think, for example, I think it's close to flat, and if it is when it's flat, whether it's periodic or not, as far as I can understand, that's still an open question. So it's a global property of the space. So yeah, but it will matter. I mean, for example, I think very literally the experiment to test if it's a torus kind of thing is you send out a light beam and you look for it coming from behind you. Not such a difficult thing to think of, difficult to do, but it's very precise. It matters in that sense. Okay, it won't make any difference to things inside this room, but it makes difference to global experiments. Okay. Good. So putting everything together, the metric of space-time is this, and it's amusing that we've had so much fun without even bothering to solve Einstein's equations. You simply have enumerated some possibilities. We don't even know if there is one solution corresponding to this possibility. We were simply playing around with maximally symmetric spaces, and we never imposed Einstein's equations on them because they're not supposed to. We're supposed to impose it on the space-time. Don't ever forget that the equation has r mu nu minus half g mu nu r. So at least that r gets contributions from all pieces, including r, t, t, which we haven't even discussed. So now it exactly is what we are going to do. That's what we are going to do. We still have 10 minutes before we start with 10 minutes late. Okay. So what's the first thing that one mindlessly does when one is faced with this metric? One writes down all the Christoffel symbols. Should I do it? And there are some that are particularly useful, so let me write those. Gamma rho E rho equals gamma theta E theta equals gamma phi E phi equals theta. This is a particularly nice one. Okay. Then I'm really not going to bother to write down all the other system. Some of them don't depend on the scale factor, so those are the most boring. Anyway, it's all in my notes, and you can find all the others there. I think the calculation is crystal clear, and also let's be happy that yet again we are getting away in life with the diagonal metric. Actually, I challenge anyone to really compute Christoffel symbols by hand for a general non-diagonal metric. The first step is to write G upper mu nu, a 4x4 matrix which has functions in it. Please invert it sometime and see how much fun it is. It's really horrible. So this is just absolutely as easy as it can get, and so it's very easy to do this calculation. And at the end we find, so the goal of this is to find the Riemann-Ricci tensors, which also are diagonal. By the way, it's obvious that they have to be diagonal. Okay, I mean, I don't know if it's obvious, but anyway. Okay. Next we find our rho is a double dot plus 2k dot squared plus 2k over 1 minus k rho squared. Okay, it should be clear that from now on we'll just keep k as a parameter and we'll put it to +1, -1 or 0 whenever we feel like. Okay, right now we just keep it. R theta theta turns out to be. Remember, these are the R's you find because you take the Riemann tensor and contract one upper and one lower index. So these are the both lower is the natural one that you find. But it turns out very nice trick which can be used to complete the solution. Okay, first of all, from the audience, R phi should be R theta theta into sin. This tends to work only when you have lower indexes. Okay, so here's now what would be the next step? Would be to calculate R by taking G inverse and tracing it with these, and then take R mu nu minus half G mu nu R. But there's a nicer thing to do, which is first of all, let's consider the equation we want. R mu nu minus half G mu nu R equals 8 pi G mu nu. Taking the trace of this equation, we find that minus R is 8 pi G T, when T is equal to G mu nu. Right? Therefore, the same equation can be written R mu nu equals 8 pi G T mu nu minus half G mu nu T. So therefore, we've got rid of the job of calculating R. T will actually be a simpler object. You can anticipate, we had already discussed T, and T was going to be some perfect fluid. Perfect fluid depends only on pressure and density. So it will be very simple to calculate the right side from perfect fluid. Okay? So this is how we use it. And the next step, which is really a very...
model.
Yeah, it's going to be a model. So I'm anticipating that whatever the model, the right side will be simpler. Generally, the right side is simpler. Okay. And one more trick is to raise one index and write the equation in this form. Why is this nice? First of all, what do I write in place of this? Please note that it's delta mu nu, it's really +1 or 0, it's not eta mu nu and it's not G mu nu. Okay? Because when you raise the index of G, what you're doing is multiplying it by its inverse. Inverse of a matrix always gives you delta. You get that? Okay. Why have we done this? Well, as soon as I write R in this basis, one up, index up and one down, you will see why. So R Pt, because this one we don't gain much. This is 3 A double dot upon A. The sign changes because G00 is -1. But in this one, this factor goes away. In this one, this factor goes away, and in this one, this factor as well as this factor go away. And we find that R rho is the same as R theta theta is the same as R phi is equal to A double dot plus 2A dot squared plus 2. So it's a nice basis where the maximal symmetry, isotropy in particular, is visible to the naked eye. Okay, so if you want isotropy, now is the statement that all these three are equal. So this part of the matrix, 4x4 matrix R mu nu, the 3 part of it is proportional to identity with this proportionality. Secondly, nothing here depends on R, on the x's, only on time. They depends on time, it's the scale factor, k is constant. So finally everything depends only on time, so that is homogeneity. Nothing depends on space. Okay? So you can see in this form manifestly the symmetries. The next thing we have to do is to settle what energy momentum tensor we want. And for that, we will now finally, for the first time in this lecture, make some assumption beyond just symmetry. So the assumption As usual, these assumptions are made partly to just find some solution of the equation. Then if the assumption is bad, we can try to improve on it. So T mu nu is of perfect fluid, right? Now notice that a perfect fluid, so let me, in anticipation, I am going to write it again with one index up and one down. It's P plus rho u mu. Actually, maybe I should. I think this is good. Plus P delta mu nu. We've already derived this for the perfect fluid. I think we have 5 more minutes because we started 10 minutes late. No? Or is it enough? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this is the perfect fluid form, but it's up to us to to choose the fore velocity of the fluid u mu. Okay, only subject to u mu equals -1. Now comes the question that we've already determined the left side in terms of a metric in a preferred frame, the so-called co-moving coordinates. Okay, and it's only reasonable to suppose that we'll find a solution when the perfect fluid is at rest in those coordinates. Okay. However, again, because some of the books write very confusingly, you should not think that isotropy is true only in co-moving coordinates. Isotropy is true in any coordinate system. In fact, maximal symmetry is the relation between r mu nu lambda rho, sorry, r ijkl and this thing. Okay. How do I put it better? Yeah, I'll just repeat. Isotropy is maybe I mean, it's a property of the 3 geometry. So maybe I'm going too far and saying it's true in any coordinates, but it's true in. Okay, wait. I slightly withdraw that statement. Within the 3 geometry, of course, it's true in any coordinates, and in fact, it led to a coordinate independent statement. However, I'm trying to understand if we did an arbitrary transformation mixing up space and time, then presumably in those coordinates we would not see any isotropy. I mean, there would be, but there would be something which is that we would, probably we wouldn't see any. Or would we? Would we not still see 6 Killing vectors? Are those Killing vectors?
You see the Lie algebra of isotropy as a subalgebra of the Killing space. You will still see that subalgebra structure in the Killing space.
That's the same statement as saying I would see the Killing vectors.
Killing vectors, we see different Killing vectors, but I mean.
That's fine. I would still see 6 Killing vectors. Have we convinced ourselves that the Killing vectors of the space are also Killing vectors of the space-time? I'm not convinced of that. Good. So let me backtrack. So it's very good. I find it very useful to go through these things because in one thing. So let's think between now and next time what it means. Yes.
In actual cosmology,
yes,
we define our coordinate systems by galaxies.
Yes.
And we assume, so a galaxy is a coordinate.
Very good.
And 2 galaxies never intersect.
Okay.
That is called the Wien's postulate.
Okay.
So what we say is that this surface of galaxy defines a time space-like hypersurface.
Okay.
So this space is homogeneous and isotropic.
Good.
So that defines our space.
Yeah.
And since galaxies define our coordinates, so u mu is 0 for galaxies. I mean, not 0. I mean, u mu is
stationary. Yeah. The fluid is at rest.
The fluid is at rest in our this
Thank you.
space.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was going to claim. I was just trying to think what is the exact reasoning. So you have given one reasoning based on galaxies, which sounds right to me. But more abstractly, the statement is that if we are trying to find a solution in these co-moving coordinates such that the space is maximally symmetric, then that solution should be sourced by an energy momentum tensor for a fluid which is at rest in the same coordinate system. That is the statement. And I think actually this has to do with the very meaning of synchronous coordinates or co-moving coordinates. And maybe I didn't think about it. I didn't think through the argument clearly enough, so I'd like to try again. But the conclusion is that the fluid should be at rest in those coordinates. Yeah.
What is interesting is that in co-moving frames, if there are 2 co-moving observers, though each of them are in relative motion, but each of them will see the same here in isotropic.
Yes, exactly.
That is the thing.
Basically, what's happening is that in co-moving coordinates, the time part of the metric is dt square. So everybody's time is the same as everybody else's. So our time interval, there is no debate about it. It doesn't depend on where you are in time nor in space. It's completely independent of both. That is the... And of course, the fact that time and space are not mixed. No DTK.
Yes.
That's right. So anyway, so the conclusion I want to make is that the fluid should be at rest in these coordinates. So it should be taken at rest in these coordinates. In the co-moving coordinates. In fact, finally, this must be the source of the name co-moving, right? Co-moving with respect to what? The coordinates are moving with the fluid. So the fluid is at rest in those coordinates. Yes.
Basically, if we have homogeneous isotropic space-like surfaces,
Yeah.
then we can redefine our coordinates such that u mu becomes 0. Not 0, I mean, the fluid elements stay at rest.
No. See, we have already chosen our coordinates because we have already decided that our metric is of this Robertson-Walker form which I wrote. Minus dt squared plus a of dt squared times some maximally symmetric space. That we've decided. Okay, so that fixes our coordinates. Okay. Now, when we introduce a fluid to be the right-hand side of the Einstein equation, we have to decide whether the fluid, what four velocity the fluid has in those coordinates in which we are working. After that, of course, it will have whatever four velocities has in any other coordinates by coordinate transformation. But we need to know that in one set of coordinates. So the claim is that in the co-moving coordinates that we have chosen, we would get a metric of the form we are looking for only if the fluid is at rest. Otherwise, presumably, we won't get any metric. We won't get any solutions. Now, we have already talked about a fluid at rest in some coordinates before, if you remember. And the condition u mu equals -1 and u mu equals u the component and 0, 0, 0. This is the condition that it's at rest, and this has to be always true. Okay, but if you combine them, if you remember with the Schwarzschild metric, we got a non-trivial factor e to the 2 alpha here. But now GTT is really -1. So from this we actually get that u mu is 1, 0, 0. So much simpler than the previous case. 1 or -1, it doesn't matter, but we choose 1, and therefore. Now I don't want to rub out in, but I also have to in. So therefore, just let me write T mu nu and then I'll end. So T mu nu has the form actually T mu nu is the simpler one. The upper mu lower mu has the form minus rho p. Actually, a lot of words just to say a very simple thing. Okay, this equation with this form of the velocity gives me minus p minus rho plus p for the first entry, so minus rho, and all the other entries don't get any contribution from here, and they are all p. And we see again manifestly that this has the three-dimensional isotropic form here. So this is going to be matched with the Ricci tensor R mu nu, right? Which has the same isotropic form. That R, rho, rho, theta, theta and phi, phi are all equal. Similarly, T, rho, rho, theta, theta and phi, phi are all equal. This is the consequence of choosing the fluid to be at rest in this frame. So now we have a hope of solution. If we had chosen an arbitrary U, then this T could have been full of entries here and there, but all the corresponding R's were already 0. We would have found far too many equations. Okay? Good. So I'll stop here and we'll solve these equations.
I didn't understand this comment. What are isotropy of CK about fluid because of moving body? I didn't understand. That, I mean, suppose there are two observers and then they have relative motion. Then if one sees the background to be isotropic, the other one sees, you will see a dipole term in general. If there is matrix is stationary, it's not scaling. The fact that seen by isotropic.
No, not the fact that something is isotropic, but the fact that if one person sees it as isotropic, then the other person also necessarily sees it as isotropic. That's what it is. You're referring to the CMB. Okay, so that is an experimental fact. Nobody said CMB had to be isotropic. CMB could have been created by God last year in from one point in the sky where he lives. Okay, then it wasn't isotropic. What he's saying is that if one observer finds that it is isotropic, then another observer will find also that it's isotropic because the time measure is the same. That other observer is in a different place, a different location.
If both of them are using the same code,
Yes, exactly.
so that is not the case in our universe. Today in our universe, two observers in relative motion will see two different CMBR.
If they have peculiar motion, then they will see. If they have co-moving observers, they will always see CMBR to be isotropic. That is the whole process.
This is experimental. That's the